I work the graveyard shift at a gas station out on a lonely stretch of highway. It's mostly quiet, just the occasional customer passing through. I've gotten used to the eerie silence and the dull buzz of the fluorescent lights, but about 2 weeks ago something changed. It started with a black car. Each night, around 2 a.m., it would pull up in front of the store and just sit there. The driver never stepped out, never pumped gas, just sat there with his headlights off, staring at the store through the darkened windows. At first, I thought maybe he was just taking a break from driving, maybe catching some sleep. But night after night, it was the same car, same spot, same silence. One night, I worked up the nerve to step out for a cigarette, trying to get a look at this guy without being too obvious. All I could see was a figure behind the wheel, the faint outline of a face staring right back at me. When our eyes met, a chill ran down my spine, and I immediately went back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake it off as paranoia. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he just liked people watching. Then last Tuesday, around 2:15 a.m., the car didn't show up. I felt a strange sense of relief, but also something else, something unsettled, like when you're expecting bad news and it hasn't come yet. I brushed it off, thinking he'd moved on. But then, just as I was starting to feel at ease, the door chime went off. In walked a man. I knew it was him immediately. He had greasy hair, dark eyes that seemed to glint under the fluorescent lights, and a faint smile that looked wrong. He didn't buy anything or even browse. He just wandered to the counter and asked me if I heard any new news about the recent disappearances in the area. I froze. There'd been rumors of missing people in the area, a couple of girls from a nearby town who'd vanished after a night out. Everyone was talking about it, but the way he asked, his tone was casual, almost conversational, like he was discussing the weather. I told him no, I hadn't heard anything new about that. He leaned in closer, his face uncomfortably close to mine, and asked if I really thought it was someone from the area that was involved. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, like he was trying to read something in my face. I managed a weak smile and said, "I just work here, man." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he straightened up, gave me a small nod, and left without another word. I watched him get back into his car and drive off, but the sense of relief I'd hoped for didn't come. It felt like he'd left something behind, like the smell of smoke in a room long after the fire's been put out. About 20 minutes later, the door chime rang again, and a girl ran in, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She was breathing heavily, and her hands were shaking. She was frantically asking for help, her voice barely above a whisper. She said some creep in a black car tried to grab her down the road. My stomach twisted. I tried to calm her down, asking for a description, even though I already knew. It was him. I grabbed the phone and called the cops, telling them about the man and his car, hoping they'd get here before he came back. As we waited, she sat on a stool behind the counter, trembling. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting him to pull up again, but the lot was empty. The stillness felt oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Just as I was starting to feel like maybe he wouldn't come back, I saw it, those familiar headlights creeping along the edge of the parking lot. He was driving slower this time, like he was daring us to come outside. The girl gripped my arm, her eyes wide with terror, and we both froze, watching as the car rolled past, the man's face barely visible in the dark, but his eyes locked onto us. He gave a slow, deliberate nod before disappearing into the night. When the cops finally arrived, they took the girl's statement and combed the area, but there was no sign of the man or his car. They promised they'd keep an eye out, but the way they spoke made it clear they didn't expect to find him. One of the officers asked me if I'd seen him before, and I nodded, describing his nightly visits. They exchanged glances but didn't say much else. After the police left and the girl had been safely escorted away, I tried to shake off the encounter, convincing myself that he wouldn't come back. Maybe he'd moved on, and I'd never have to see him again. But the next night at exactly 2 a.m., I saw it again. The same black car parked in the exact same spot. The only difference this time, there was no one inside. I locked the doors and called the cops immediately. When they showed up, they ran the plates and dusted the car for prints. The car was stolen, and the only prints they found belonged to the registered owner. They towed the car away, and there hasn't been any sign of the guy since that night. This happened to me about a year ago. It was late summer, and I was driving back from visiting a friend who lived about 3 hours away. I had taken a different route back to avoid highway traffic, which in hindsight was probably a bad idea. The back roads were pretty isolated, just long stretches of empty road with fields on either side, and not much else. About halfway home, my car started making this weird rattling noise. I tried to ignore it at first, hoping it would stop, but after a few minutes it got louder. Then, out of nowhere, my engine just cut off. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, and I had no choice but to pull over to the side of the road. I tried starting the car again, but it wouldn't turn over. I checked my phone, and of course I had no signal. I figured I'd wait a bit and try again, but after about 20 minutes, it was clear I wasn't going anywhere. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, and it was starting to get dark. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do, I noticed headlights in the distance. A car was coming my way, and part of me was relieved. Maybe someone could help me out, or at least give me a ride to the nearest town. The car slowed down as it approached and then pulled over in front of mine. A man got out. He was probably in his mid-40s, scruffy looking, wearing an old baseball cap and a dirty jacket. He seemed a little rough around the edges, but I was desperate, so I didn't care. He walked up to my window, and I rolled it down just a crack. He asked if I was having car trouble, and I said, yeah, it just died on me. He nodded and asked if he could take a look. I hesitated for a second, but then figured, why not? I didn't have any other options. I popped the hood, and he walked over to check it out. I stayed in the car, watching him fumble around with something in the engine. He didn't seem to be doing much, just poking around without really fixing anything. After a few minutes, he came back to my window. He said my alternator's shot, and I wasn't going to get it started out here. He offered to give me a ride into town, saying there's a gas station a few miles up the road. They might have a tow truck. Something about his offer didn't sit right with me. I don't know why, but I just got this bad feeling in my gut. He was being helpful, but there was something off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I didn't want to get in that car with him. I told him thanks, but I was going to wait a bit and see if my phone got a signal. He didn't leave. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me through the window. The way he looked at me, it was like he was sizing me up. I felt my heart rate pick up, and I tried to avoid eye contact. He asked if I was sure and said it'll be dark soon. He also said it wasn't safe to be out here in the dark. That bad feeling in my gut grew stronger. I forced a smile and said, yeah, I'm good. Thanks, though. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just kept standing there, staring at me. Finally, he shrugged and started walking back to his car. I watched him get in, and for a moment, I thought that was it, he was leaving. But instead of driving off, he just sat there. I watched his car in my rearview mirror, waiting for him to leave, but he didn't. He just stayed parked in front of me, engine running. At this point, I was getting really scared. Why wasn't he leaving? I tried my phone again. Still no signal. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. After what felt like forever, his car door opened again, and he got out. My stomach dropped. He started walking back toward my car, and I panicked. I locked my doors and grabbed my keys, holding them tight in my hand like they were going to do anything. He walked up to my window again, this time looking more serious. Look, he said, leaning in close. I don't think you understand. You're not safe out here. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to say or do. I just stared straight ahead, refusing to look at him. Then, out of nowhere, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. Another car was coming down the road, and I've never felt so relieved in my life. The guy must have noticed too, because he backed away from my window and quickly walked back to his car. He didn't say anything else, just got in and drove off, speeding down the road before the other car even got close. I waited until the new car passed by before I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My hands were shaking, and I sat there for a while, trying to calm down. Eventually, I was able to start my car again, and I got the hell out of there. I still don't know what that guy's intentions were, but I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and didn't get in the car with him. I don't know what would have happened if that second car hadn't come along, but I don't want to think about it.